The night was thick with silence, the kind of silence that made every breath sound too loud. The mountains of eastern Afghanistan loomed like dark silhouettes against the sky, jagged and endless. A pale moon cut through the clouds in fleeting streaks, lighting up the valley in ghostly flashes. For the SEAL team moving through that rugged terrain, silence was their greatest ally, and every sound, every crunch of gravel beneath their boots, every click of a weapon was calculated and measured. Their mission was supposed to be routine. Reconnaissance, in and out. The objective was to locate an enemy supply route that had been feeding insurgent groups in the region. Intelligence had suggested the area was sparsely guarded, nothing more than a quiet passage used under the cover of night. The operation brief had been straightforward. Move in, gather coordinates, set up surveillance equipment, and disappear. Before sunrise, no contact, no confrontation. But in war, even the best intelligence was only as strong as the sources behind it. Tonight, those sources were about to prove deadly wrong. Lieutenant Sarah Hayes walked at the center of the column, scanning the shadows with a discipline born from years of training. At 32, she had been in combat zones enough to recognize when something didn't feel right. The stillness in the air was too heavy, the silence too complete. It wasn't the natural quiet of a sleeping valley. It was deliberate, like the land itself was holding its breath. She tightened her grip on her rifle, her finger resting near the trigger guard. Her eyes flicked across the jagged terrain, noting every dark ridge and unnatural shape. Behind her, Petty Officer Ryan Cole whispered over comms. Movement 2. A clock. The team froze, rifles swinging toward the direction. Nothing, just shadows stretching across the rocks. Sarah's jaw tightened. She didn't like it. The commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Mark Stevens, gave the silent hand signal to continue forward. They had a timetable to keep, and hesitation in the field was often as dangerous as the enemy itself. The team advanced, boots crunching. Softly on gravel, hearts pounding louder than footsteps. They reached the midpoint of the valley when the first shot cracked. A bullet screamed past Sarah's ear and ricocheted off the rocks. Before anyone could react, a storm of gunfire erupted from both ridges. Muzzle flashes lit up the night, and the valley exploded with chaos. Contact, left and right. Stevens barked, diving behind a boulder. The team scattered, seeking cover as bullets rained down. The air filled with the deafening roar of automatic fire, the sharp whiz of rounds slicing through the air, the thump of grenades detonating in the distance. Sarah hit the ground hard, dust filling her mouth as she rolled behind a jagged outcrop. Her heart hammered, but her mind snapped into focus. This isn't random, she thought. The precision was undeniable. The enemy hadn't just stumbled across them. They had been waiting, positioned in elevated ground with clear lines of fire. The SEALs were pinned, trapped in a deadly crossfire, with little chance to maneuver. Fall back now. Stevens shouted over comms. His voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the weight of the decision. Retreat wasn't cowardice, it was survival. The team began moving, leaping from cover to cover, firing short bursts to suppress the enemy. But for every shot they fired, 10 more came in return. The ridges glowed with muzzle flashes, enemy fighters positioned like hunters closing in on prey. Sarah pressed her cheek to the ground, scanning through her scope. Figures moved in coordination, hand signals flashing in the night. These weren't just foot soldiers. Their discipline was too sharp, their timing too perfect. Someone was directing them, someone important. Her instincts screamed louder than the bullets. This was bigger than an ambush. Behind her, Cole shouted, "Lieutenant, we've got to move." His voice cracked with urgency as he scrambled from one boulder to another. But Sarah didn't move, not yet. She kept her rifle trained, watching the patterns unfold across the ridge. every fiber of her. Being told her that retreat meant abandoning something monumental. If those leaders slipped away into the shadows, the enemy would remain strong, their campaign intact. For a heartbeat, the battlefield seemed to slow. The noise dulled into background static, her world narrowing to the sight picture through her scope. She saw the shapes of men standing taller than the rest, commanding with sharp gestures. Generals, high-ranking officers in the middle of a firefight, a rare vulnerability. Her pulse steadied, her breathing slowed. She knew what this meant. Stephen's voice thundered again. Retreat now. That's an order. Sarah exhaled, but instead of moving back, she moved forward. Crawling low, using the darkness as her shield, she pushed deeper into the killing zone. Bullets cracked overhead, dirt spraying into her face, but she didn't flinch. Every inch she gained brought her closer to the truth she alone had recognized. The SEAL team, focused on escape, didn't see her break away. They assumed she was falling back with them. Only Cole noticed her silhouette moving in the wrong direction, and his heart skipped. Sarah, no! He shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the gunfire. Sarah Hayes had made her choice. For her, the mission had changed. What began as reconnaissance had transformed into something far greater. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was history, unfolding under the cover of smoke and chaos. If she could reach those leaders, if she could disrupt the command structure orchestrating this ambush, the tide could turn. Courage didn't always look like bravery. Sometimes it looked like defiance, like one soldier stepping forward while everyone else stepped back. The night swallowed her figure as she crawled into the teeth of the ambush. The retreat had been called, but Sarah Hayes refused to listen. The war wasn't finished with her yet. Sarah's breath came in steady bursts as she pressed her body close to the cold earth. The valley had transformed into a furnace of noise. Tracer rounds streaked across the night sky like fiery spears. Grenades cracked with bone-rattling force, and the shouts of men blurred with the thunder of machine guns. Every second of hesitation meant death. Yet she wasn't hesitating. She was calculating. The order to retreat still echoed in her ears, firm and absolute. In the Navy SEALs, orders were law. Disobedience could fracture a mission, endanger lives, and tarnish trust that had taken years to forge. But Sarah's instincts weren't wrong. She had felt at the moment the first shots rang out, that strange pull in her chest, the certainty that the battlefield wasn't what it seemed. Lieutenant Hayes, do you copy? Fall back now. Commander Stevens barked over the comms, his voice ironclad. Sarah's eyes stayed fixed through her scope. She adjusted her position slightly, tracking shadows darting across the ridgeline. Amid the chaos, she caught sight of figures moving differently from the rest. They weren't panicked or erratic. Their hand signals were sharp, deliberate, practiced. The enemy soldiers around them reacted instantly, adjusting their formations with military precision. Her breath caught. Whoever those men were, they weren't ordinary fighters. They carried themselves like commanders, radiating authority, even. In the chaos of war, generals maybe, or regional leaders whose capture or elimination would send shockwaves through the enemy's entire operation. That realization cut through Sarah like lightning. She whispered under her breath, "This isn't just an ambush. This is a meeting ground." The SEALs had walked straight into the hornet's nest, and not by accident. This wasn't a skirmish. It was a calculated trap to lure them in, orchestrated by leaders bold enough to stand on the field themselves. The retreat Stevens ordered was the right tactical call, but it meant abandoning the chance of a lifetime. Behind her, Cole scrambled over the rocks, his voice sharp with panic. "Sarah, move. They'll cut you to pieces." He dove behind cover, as enemy fire chewed into the earth near his boots. His words barely reached her. Sarah's heart raced, but her mind was ice calm. She thought of the years she had spent training for moments like this, moments when instinct whispered louder than reason, when hesitation could mean letting history slip away. She had studied battles where boldness rewrote entire wars, and she knew the truth. Sometimes victory wasn't about numbers or plans. Sometimes it was about one person making the impossible choice. Her comb crackled again, Stephen's voice carrying authority. "This is an order, Lieutenant. Pull back now." Sarah closed her eyes for a second, letting the command sink in. She respected Stevens. She trusted him. He had led them through hell before, and brought them out alive. But even commanders weren't infallible. Orders were shaped by what they knew, and Stevens didn't see what she saw. He didn't feel the shift in the air, didn't recognize the discipline among the shadows. Disobeying him would mean breaking every code drilled into her since training. Yet, disobeying her instincts could mean something worse. Watching her team survive tonight, only to face countless more ambushes planned by the very men she had within her sights. The weight of the decision pressed down on her chest, heavier, and her body armor. Gunfire flared again, and dirt sprayed across her helmet. She blinked hard, snapping back into focus. Through her scope, she tracked one of the tall figures. His movements were commanding, precise. Around him, soldiers surged like waves, perfectly coordinated. This wasn't coincidence. This was leadership personified. Her jaw tightened. If she turned back now, the ambush might end, but the war wouldn't. These generals, or whatever rank they held, would continue directing operations, killing more allies, striking more villages, destabilizing the region further. Taking them down could collapse entire networks. Her decision crystallized in that moment. She wasn't going to retreat, not now. Sarah shifted her weight, crawling forward on her stomach, every movement slow and deliberate. Bullets cracked overhead, one snapping so close it tore a groove. Into the rock beside her. She kept moving. The earth smelled of dust and cordite, the metallic tang of war filling her lungs. Behind her, Cole spotted her silhouette moving in the wrong direction. "Sarah, you're insane. Get back here." His voice was raw with desperation, but she didn't respond. Instead, she whispered into her calm, her voice steady, negative. "I have eyes on leadership elements. Repeat, leadership on the ridge." There was a pause. Then Stephen's reply came, sharp and furious. "Lieutenant Hayes, that's not your call. Fall back now." "That's a direct order." But she muted her calm. The battle around her faded into background noise as her world narrowed to the ridge ahead. Her training kicked into overdrive. Movement calculated in 3-second bursts. Crawl, paw, scan, fire. She fired short, controlled shots at enemy soldiers, flanking the generals, dropping them with precision. Each one bought her a few more feet forward, each one drawing fire away from her retreating team. The enemy realized she was advancing, and their focus shifted. A torrent of gunfire ripped into her position. Shards of rock sliced into her cheek, but she pressed on. Every inch was paid for with risk, but she refused to stop. Cole's voice echoed faintly in her ear, even though she'd muted comms. He wasn't shouting at her through the system anymore. He was screaming across the battlefield itself, his words lost in the chaos. He couldn't understand why she wouldn't retreat. None of them could, but Sarah knew why. She thought of the faces back home, families who depended on soldiers like her to end wars before they reached their doorsteps. She thought of the villages she had seen razed, the children displaced, the women crying for husbands lost. She thought of all the missions where victory was defined by survival, not change. Tonight could be different. Tonight she could shift the balance. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, reloading her rifle as she crawled closer. Through her scope, the two commanding figures became clearer. They stood taller than their men, shouting orders that cut through the din of battle. They weren't hiding. They were defiant, confident in their trap. Sarah's lips pressed into a hard line. That arrogance would be their undoing. Another burst of gunfire raked across her position, one round striking her body armor with a bone-jarring impact that knocked the breath from her lungs. She rolled onto her side, gasping, vision swimming. Pain radiated through her chest, but she pushed herself upright, her rifle still steady. She wasn't going back. Not now. Not ever. The SEALs continued retreating under Stephen's orders, unaware. At one of their own was rewriting the mission with each crawl forward. The ambush had turned into a battlefield of choice, and Sarah Hayes had made hers. The line between duty and defiance blurred, but in her mind there was no conflict. Her duty was greater than survival. It was greater than obedience. It was to seize the fleeting moment when history bent under the weight of a single decision. And tonight, that decision was hers alone. The battlefield had become a blur of smoke and chaos, yet Sarah Hayes felt her world narrow to a razor-sharp point. She lay prone against the jagged earth, her cheek pressed to the stock of her rifle, her eye locked through the green-tinted haze of her night vision scope. Each breath she drew was steady, deliberate, controlled. Around her, bullets tore the ground into splinters. Tracer rounds seared across the valley, and men shouted in languages that mixed with the thunder of gunfire. But none of it mattered. Not the pain radiating from the impact on her chest plate, not the fear crawling at the edges of her mind. Only the ridge mattered. She swept her scope slowly, meticulously, searching for confirmation of what her instincts had already screamed. This wasn't an ordinary ambush. Through the smoke, she caught sight of them again. Two men, distinct from the chaos. They weren't ducking or scrambling for cover like the fighters around them. No, they stood taller, commanding with sharp gestures, shouting orders that cut through the din. Their movements were efficient, disciplined, every action carrying authority. Soldiers around them responded instantly, like pieces on a chessboard. Moved by unseen hands, Sarah's pulse quickened. Her gut had been right. These weren't just field commanders. They were high-ranking leaders, possibly generals. And they were here, exposed in the middle of the fight. She whispered under her breath, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. "You sons of bitches. You shouldn't be here." Every instinct screamed, mark the coordinates, call for air support, and pull back. That was the textbook answer, the safe answer. But there was no time for safe. Air support couldn't arrive in time. Her team was already in retreat, pinned, down and bleeding. If those men escaped, they'd vanish into the labyrinth of mountains, unreachable again. This was the moment, one chance. One shot at cutting the enemy's head off the snake. Sarah shifted her weight, crawling forward another yard, ignoring the sharp sting of rocks cutting into her elbows and knees. The ground smelled of burnt cordite and churned dust, a cocktail of war she had tasted too many times before. She paused, scanning again. The generals had shifted positions, surrounded by a small ring of guards. Their silhouettes moved with lethal confidence, directing the ambush with precision that made her skin crawl. A sharp crack split the night as a bullet slammed into the rock inches from her face, spraying shards into her goggles. She rolled quickly, pressing tighter against the earth, heart hammering but hands steady. She wiped the dust from her lenses and raised her rifle again. Her scope settled on one of the guards. She squeezed the trigger once, clean and controlled. The man dropped. Instantly, his body tumbling down the slope. Shouts erupted. The circle around the leaders tightened, and for the first time, Sarah saw hesitation ripple through the enemy ranks. She smiled grimly. They knew someone was hunting them. But firing had consequences. The moment her shot echoed across the valley, enemy attention shifted. Tracer rounds ripped toward her position, shooing into the rocks with explosive force. Dirt exploded around her, the earth trembling under relentless fire. Sarah tucked herself behind cover, breathing hard, sweat stinging her eyes. Her muscles screamed for rest, but she refused to stop. She reached for another magazine, sliding it into her rifle with a practiced click. Her mind replayed Stephen's last order: fall back now. Disobeying an order was one thing. Surviving long enough to make it count was another. She wasn't just gambling with her life. She was gambling with her team's trust, their belief in each other. SEALs were bound tighter than family, forged in blood and training. Breaking formation, going rogue, could fracture that bond forever. But she forced the thought aside. If I can take them out, this ends tonight. She crawled forward again, inch by inch, moving from shadow to shadow. Each movement felt like defiance, etched into the earth itself. She was no longer retreating, no. Longer part of the team's withdrawal. She was carving her own path, one driven by the certainty that history had landed in her scope. Another burst of enemy fire whizzed overhead. She flattened herself, barely daring to breathe. Through her goggles, she watched as one of the generals lifted binoculars, scanning the valley, likely tracking her retreating comrades. His arrogance was palpable. He believed the fight was already won. Sarah's lips pressed into a hard line. Not if she had anything to say about it. Her thoughts flickered, unbidden, to the past. To the long months of Bud S training where instructors screamed in her face, pushing her body to collapse. To the countless nights on deployments where she had stared into darkness, knowing danger lurked unseen. To the losses the teammates who hadn't come home, whose names were etched into memorial walls, she visited silently, promising them their sacrifice wasn't in vain. Every lesson, every hardship, every scar had led her here. To this valley, to this night, to this choice. She steadied her rifle, aligning her sights. Another guard moved into view. She fired once, dropping him instantly. The circle shrank again, panic now spreading among the soldiers who realized their leaders were targets. Shouts erupted in frantic tones, weapons spraying blindly into the night. But Sarah remained patient, calm, methodical. She wasn't here to fight them all. She was here for the men at the center. The generals ducked behind cover, but not fast enough. She had seen their faces hard, weathered, scarred by years of command. They weren't symbols anymore. They were flesh and blood, killable. The realization fueled her resolve. Another grenade detonated nearby, shaking the earth beneath her. Rocks rained down, clattering against her helmet. She coughed, spitting dirt, but her rifle never wavered. She crawled forward again, each inch a victory, each breath a reminder that she was still alive, still moving, still fighting. The distance between her and the generals shrank. 50 yards, 40, 30. She could feel it now, the pull of history, the electric charge of destiny pressing against her skin. She wasn't just a soldier in a firefight anymore. She was the blade poised above the enemy's throat. The retreat had been called, but Sarah Hayes wasn't retreating. She was hunting, and the generals didn't even know the predator was already inside their lines. The ground shook with relentless percussion, every explosion rippling through Sarah Hayes' bones, as if the earth itself rejected her presence. She pressed her back against a jagged rock, chest heaving, her rifle warm from repeated firing. The ambush still thundered all around, but her focus had sharpened into something primal. There were no more doubts, no second guessing. She had seen the truth. 2 generals directing the storm. And if she was going to reach them, she'd have to cut through the firestorm one step at a time. Her earpiece crackled faintly. Stevens. Voice barked through the static. Team Bravo, rally on my mark. Hayes, where the hell are you? She didn't answer. She couldn't. She had muted her comms again, shutting out the orders that threatened to drag her backward. Stevens was pulling the team out, and that was his job. But her job, at least, as she defined it, was here. In the dirt. In the line of fire. In pursuit of the men orchestrating the slaughter. Sarah peeked around the rock. 2 enemy guards had taken position just 20 yards away, scanning for her movement. She ducked back quickly as bullets smacked against her cover, the sharp whine of ricochets screaming past her ears. Her pulse slowed, her breathing shallow. She counted silently 1, 2, 3. She rolled out, rifle already raised, 2 precise bursts. The first guard crumpled with a cry, his weapon clattering against stone. The second spun, trying to fire, but her next shot punched through his chest, silencing him instantly. She slid back behind cover, heart hammering, sweat dripping from her brow. For a brief moment, the silence near her position felt deafening, but the lull didn't last. A hail of gunfire tore into the ridge she had just vacated, the enemy reacting with fury. She smiled grimly. Good, look at me, not them. Her defiance wasn't just survival anymore, it was strategy. By pressing forward, by drawing fire, she had shifted the enemy's focus. Bullets that might have chewed into her retreating. Teammates were now zeroed in on her lone silhouette in the chaos. The thought brought a strange comfort. If her gamble bought her team another minute to regroup, it was worth every risk. But she wasn't here to just buy time. She was here to finish something. Sarah reloaded swiftly, her hands moving with practiced ease. She shifted to a new angle, crawling low between bursts of incoming fire. Dust caked her gloves, her knees. Tore against stone, but she didn't slow. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ridge where she'd last seen the generals. Through the haze of smoke and fire, she glimpsed them again. Their silhouettes were unmistakable. 2 men barking orders, rallying. Soldiers with gestures that carried command. Even from this distance, Sarah could sense their authority, their arrogance. They believed they were untouchable, shielded by layers of fighters and the chaos of battle. But arrogance could blind, and she was closing in. A sudden burst of machine gun. Fire pinned her flat against the earth. The rounds shredded the ground inches from her helmet, pelting her with shards of stone. She pressed herself tighter, lungs straining as dust clogged her throat. Her fingers clenched her rifle, waiting, listening. The gunner reloaded, the telltale pause giving her the chance she needed. She sprang up, firing 3 clean shots. Gunner slumped over his weapon, the heavy machine gun falling silent. The silence that followed was short-lived. Enemy shouts filled the air, their tone frantic now. The Americans were supposed to be retreating, yet one of them was pressing forward, carving a path through their defenses. Confusion rippled through their ranks. Sarah used it. She advanced again, crawling, rolling, sprinting in short bursts whenever cover allowed. Each movement was a gamble, each second survival by razor's edge. Her body ached, adrenaline burning through her veins, but her mind stayed sharp. She counted her rounds, adjusted her angles, read the battlefield like a chessboard. Every step closer brought more danger and more clarity. She thought briefly of her family back home. Her father, a Marine veteran, had once told her that war was a place where rules bent under necessity. Sometimes, he had said, you'll find yourself standing alone against orders, against fear, against everything. And when that moment comes, you'll know it. You'll feel it in your bones. She felt it now. Her bones screamed with the certainty that this was the moment he had spoken of. Another grenade detonated nearby, the blast wave lifting her off. the ground and slamming her against the rocks. Pain flared in her shoulder. Her ears rang with piercing static, but she gritted her teeth and pushed up. Her rifle lay a few feet away. She snatched it, wincing as her bruised muscles protested. The enemy fire slackened briefly as smoke from the blast obscured visibility. She seized the opportunity, charging forward to the next ridge. She slid into cover, heart hammering, chest burning with exertion. She was close now. So close she could almost hear the generals' voices cutting through the chaos. Their guards were fewer now, many already taken down by her precision fire. But the survivors were desperate, their weapons snapping with furious bursts as they tried to keep her pinned. Sarah leaned out, her rifle steady. She fired again, another guard collapsing. She ducked back instantly as return fire shredded the edge of her cover. She was breathing hard now, lungs aching, sweat stinging her eyes. But she didn't falter. For every shot she fired, for every guard she dropped, the path narrowed, the risk sharpened, and the chance of success grew brighter. She was no longer just a soldier pressing forward. She was a force, a single flame cutting through the storm, drawing all eyes, all fury toward herself. And in doing so, she had given her team the lifeline they needed. She didn't know if they realized it yet, but her defiance had become their shield. Her forward push had bought them space to regroup, to survive. That thought fueled her legs, steadied her arms, sharpened her aim. The ridge loomed closer. She could almost see the whites of the general's eyes through the smoke. Her mission was no longer about reconnaissance. It wasn't even about survival. It was about rewriting the outcome of the battle with her own two hands. Sarah Hayes pressed deeper into the fire, her silhouette framed by explosions and gunfire, her will unbroken. And every step carried her closer to the men whose fall could change everything. The battlefield pulsed like a living beast, every explosion its heartbeat, every shot its breath. Sarah Hayes felt herself inside its lungs, suffocating yet alive with fire. The night sky burned with tracer rounds, smoke swirling in oily clouds, the acrid stench of cordite filling her nostrils. Her body screamed with exhaustion. Her shoulder throbbed from the grenade blast, but her eyes sharp, relentless remained fixed on the ridge ahead. She could see them now. Two figures moving with purpose, taller and broader than the men around them, armored in confidence. Generals, their voices rose above the chaos, commanding, steady. Soldiers scrambled at their gestures, even as Sarah's bullets picked them off one by one. These weren't figureheads hiding in bunkers. They were men who believed themselves invincible, standing in the storm they had unleashed. Not for long. Sarah pressed herself lower, crawling across the dirt. The ground was littered with spent shells, shards of rock, and bodies, some friend, mostly foe. The moon broke through the clouds in a thin silver blade, briefly illuminating the ridge. For a heartbeat, she saw their faces clearly. Hardened, scarred, eyes burning with conviction. These were not men who would surrender. They would fight until their last breath. And she intended to take that breath from them. A guard spotted her silhouette in the moonlight. Shouts erupted. Gunfire tore into the ground beside her, each impact thundering in her ears. She rolled into cover, heart slamming against her ribs. She waited 3 beats, 4 then popped up, her rifle steady. 3 controlled shots. The guard fell, his scream cut short. The generals ducked, their circle of protection shrinking again. Panic rippled among their soldiers. The Americans were supposed to be fleeing, yet here one woman advanced, relentless, unstoppable. She had become a ghost in their midst, and fear gnawed at their confidence. Sarah's chest burned as she reloaded. Her hands trembled from adrenaline. But her movements were mechanical, ingrained through years of repetition. Magazine in, bolt forward. Check sights. She whispered under her breath, just a little closer. A burst of fire chewed into her cover, spraying her with rock fragments. One shard sliced across her cheek, warm blood dripping down her face. She ignored it, pressing her scope to her eye. One general was shouting, his voice carrying even through the noise. His hands slashed the air in furious commands. Sarah tracked him, steadying her breath. Her finger hovered on the trigger. She thought of Stevens, of Cole, of the retreating team who might even now be realizing she wasn't with them. She thought of the civilians who would never know her name, but who might live because of what she was about to do. She exhaled, squeezed. The rifle cracked. The general's body snapped backward, his voice silenced forever. For a moment, time froze. Soldiers around him staggered, disbelief etched on their faces. The second general's eyes went wide, shock and fury blending into one. He dove for cover, barking frantic orders as his men scrambled. Sarah's pulse roared in her ears. One down, one to go. But the battlefield didn't pause to honor her kill. The enemy's fury doubled. Bullets raked across her position, pinning her flat. Grenades exploded nearby, showering her with dirt and heat. Her lungs seized against the smoke. She coughed, rolled, pushed forward another yard. She was exposed now, her position compromised, but retreat never crossed her mind. She locked her sights on the second general. He was clever, moving low, using the chaos to mask his position. But arrogance still marked him. He paused to shout again, raising his head above cover. That was all Sarah needed. She steadied herself, tuning out the storm. Her body ached, her chest screamed, but her mind went still. The world shrank to the man in her sights. Another breath, another squeeze. Her shot cracked, and the second general fell, his body crumpling against the rocks. The battlefield broke. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, like a dam bursting, the enemy's coordination shattered. Soldiers shouted in panic, some firing wildly, others dropping their weapons and fleeing. The disciplined storm had dissolved into chaos. The heart of the ambush had been ripped out, and the beast collapsed. Sarah lowered her rifle slowly, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Blood trickled from her cheek, sweat stung her eyes, and her arms trembled from exertion. Yet her gaze stayed locked on the ridge, on the still forms of the men she had hunted. She had done it. Against orders, against odds, she had done it. But the battle wasn't over. A squad of enemy fighters, enraged and desperate, charged her position. She swung her rifle up, firing in controlled bursts. 3 fell, 4, but the rest kept coming. She ducked into cover, switching magazines with trembling hands. Her body screamed for rest, but she pushed it aside. Voices rose behind her. Familiar voices. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Through the smoke, her teammates were advancing, their weapons blazing. The retreat had turned. They had seen what she had done, or maybe just realized she had refused to fall back, and now they were with her. Cole's voice cut through the chaos, raw with both relief and fury. "You're out of your damn mind, Hayes." She grinned despite the blood on her lips. "You're welcome." Together, the SEALs surged forward, cutting through the disoriented fighters. Leaderless, the enemy crumbled. Some fled into the night, their courage gone with their commanders. Others dropped their weapons, surrendering in defeat. The valley, once a death trap, was theirs. Sarah sank to her knees behind cover, her rifle still gripped tight, though her arms shook with exhaustion. Her chest heaved, every breath a reminder she was still alive. Around her, the battlefield quieted. The crack of gunfire faded, replaced by the groans of wounded men and the distant hiss of fires burning in the dark. She stared up at the ridge, where the generals lay. Their bodies were shadows against the rocks, but to her, they were monuments. Proof that defiance had weight. Proof that one soldier's choice could shatter an army. For a long moment, she just breathed. The team gathered around her, Stephen's face hard, but his eyes soft with something like pride. He said nothing, and she didn't offer an explanation. The battlefield spoke for itself. Sarah Hayes had walked into enemy fire when everyone else pulled back, and in doing so, she had turned retreat into victory. The battlefield was still at last. Smoke curled from blackened craters, drifting lazily into the night, as though the earth itself exhaled relief. Fires flickered among the rocks, casting ghostly shadows across the valley. The crackle of burning debris replaced the roar of gunfire. What minutes earlier had been a storm of chaos now lay smothered, broken, almost unrecognizable. Sarah Hayes crouched behind the jagged wall that had been her final piece of cover, her rifle still clutched, tight to her chest. Her body trembled with exhaustion, every muscle twitching from the overload of adrenaline. Sweat dripped into her eyes, stinging where blood from the cut on her cheek had already dried. She swallowed hard, throat raw from smoke and grit. Her eyes lifted to the ridge where the two generals lay still. They looked smaller now, diminished, their bodies twisted among the rocks. Only minutes earlier, they had commanded legions with a few shouted words. Now silence wrapped them like a shroud. The sound of boots crunching over gravel snapped her back to the present. "Clear here," a voice called. Another answered from the other side of the valley. The SEAL team was advancing cautiously, sweeping through the battlefield to confirm no enemy fighters remained. Sarah straightened, her legs shaking beneath her as she pushed herself upright. Stevens appeared through the haze, his rifle angled down but still ready. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes locked onto her as though trying to reconcile the fact she was still standing. "You disobeyed." "Orders," he said flatly. Sarah's lips curled into the faintest smile. "And you're alive because of it." He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he studied her face, then glanced past her toward the ridge. His jaw tightened. "Was it you?" She nodded once. His exhale was long, slow, heavy. "Damn it, Hayes." But his voice carried no anger, only awe wrapped in disbelief. Behind them, Cole let out a low whistle. She just took out two generals, alone. His voice held a kind of reverence, the tone soldiers used when speaking about legends. Sarah said nothing. She didn't feel like a legend. She felt human, painfully human, her body aching, her lungs raw, her spirit balanced precariously between triumph and collapse. The team regrouped in the valley, forming a defensive circle as medics checked wounds and technicians swept the enemy dead for intelligence. Stevens finally signaled for two men to confirm the generals. They climbed the ridge, flashlights cutting through the smoke, and minutes later returned with solemn nods. "It's them," one said. "No doubt about it." The words hung heavy in the air. Everyone felt their weight. Stevens rubbed his face with a gloved hand. Commands not going to believe this. But they would, Sarah thought. The evidence lay scattered all around them. The broken ambush, the scattered enemy, and the still forms of the commanders who had orchestrated it all. Hours later, as dawn painted the horizon with pale light, the team established a temporary command post on higher ground. Drones circled above, scanning the terrain for any sign of regrouping forces, but the valley remained eerily quiet. The enemy was shattered, retreating into the mountains or abandoning the fight entirely. At the post, Sarah sat on an overturned ammo crate, helmet resting beside her, sipping tepid water from her canteen. Her hands shook as she held it, the adrenaline long gone, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. Cole sat beside her, silent for once, staring at her like she was something more than flesh and blood. Finally, he spoke. "You know what you just did, right? Those weren't just field commanders. Intel says they were running the entire sector. This whole front depended on them." Sarah raised her eyes. "Then I guess the front just collapsed." Stevens approached, carrying a tablet glowing with data fed from higher command. He crouched, holding it where she could see. "They've confirmed it. Those generals were leading an offensive that would have swept through 3 provinces. Thousands of civilians would have been caught in the crossfire. And our mission tonight was supposed to slow them, buy time. You didn't slow them, Hayes. You stopped them." The weight of his words pressed down on her. She stared at the ground, processing. She had acted on instinct, on defiance, on a refusal to retreat when everything screamed to pull back. She hadn't thought about strategy or geopolitics. She had thought only about the ridge, about the men giving orders, about the sense that this moment mattered more than survival. Now the truth crystallized. Her choice had altered the battlefield. Stevens studied her, his expression unreadable. "You'll get a medal for this. Maybe more than one. But I need to know, why did you do it? Why didn't you follow the order?" "To retreat?" Sarah looked at him, her gaze steady. "Because retreat wasn't the mission. Surviving wasn't the mission. Stopping them was." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Then Stevens nodded slowly, almost reluctantly. "Fair enough." The next hours blurred into reports, encrypted communications, and tactical updates. Higher command confirmed what the team had already realized. Sarah's actions had decapitated the enemy's leadership in the region. Without their generals, the fighters would scatter. Supply lines would falter. Planned defensives would crumble. As the reality settled in, so did the atmosphere among the team. They had walked into a nightmare, expected to limp away beaten, but instead they had emerged victorious. And all because one soldier refused to back down. Cole leaned back against a rock, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He glanced at Sarah and chuckled softly. "They're going to tell this story for years, you know. Maybe decades. Hell, they'll probably make a movie about it." Sarah shook her head, smiling faintly. Let's just hope they get the details right. But inwardly, she wasn't thinking about stories or movies. She was thinking about the weight of the lives spared, the civilians who would never know. How close they had come to destruction. The soldiers on her own team who had survived because she chose to walk into fire instead of away from it. That was the only story that mattered to her. As the sun rose higher, washing the battlefield in light, the valley revealed its scars craters, bloodstains, twisted metal, silence where chaos had raged. Yet among the devastation, there was something else too. A sense of victory. Not the hollow kind born of survival, but the real kind, born of striking a blow that shifted the course of war. Sarah sat quietly, helmet on her knees, staring into the distance. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a soldier who had made a choice, one that could have ended in death, but instead ended in victory. And though she knew the coming days would bring recognition, medals, and questions, she was certain of one thing. In that valley, when everyone else turned back, she had moved forward. And that, she realized, was enough. The transport helicopter thundered across the sky, its rotors slicing through the morning haze. Inside the cabin, the SEAL team sat in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts. The valley they had left behind was already fading into memory, swallowed by distance and smoke. For the first time since the ambush, Sarah Hayes allowed herself to lean back, muscles loosening, exhaustion seeping in like water through cracked stone. Her hands still shook, not from fear, but from the residual tremors of adrenaline. Across from her, Cole gave a faint grin, though his eyes carried the haunted look of a man who had walked through fire. He raised 2 fingers in a silent salute toward her. Sarah acknowledged it with the slightest nod. Words were unnecessary. Stevens sat rigid near the door, headset pressed tight against his ears as he monitored communications. His face, as usual, was unreadable, but the occasional glance he shot Sarah spoke volumes. He hadn't decided yet whether to reprimand or commend her. Perhaps he hadn't decided because he knew he might need to do both. The flight back to base seemed endless, yet Sarah knew it was shorter than most missions. Time, she realized, bent differently in combat. A minute under fire stretched into eternity, while an hour of flight blurred into a heartbeat. When the helicopter finally descended, kicking up dust across the landing zone, a line of officers and medical personnel was already waiting. The SEALs disembarked, boots crunching against the tarmac, weapons slung low. They looked like survivors, battered but intact. Sarah walked among them, helmet in hand, her uniform streaked with dirt and blood. A colonel approached immediately, eyes flicking over the team before settling on her. Lieutenant Hayes. His tone carried authority, but also curiosity, as though he had been briefed, but wanted to see for himself. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the weight pressing on her shoulders. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Follow me. The rest of you, medical checks first." Stevens stepped forward, ready to interject, but the colonel's gaze silenced him. Sarah fell into step beside the officer, her boots striking the concrete in rhythm with his. Inside the command tent, screens flickered with drone footage, satellite feeds, and streams of data. Analysts buzzed around like hornets, eyes fixed on glowing monitors. At the center of it all stood General Rourke, the commanding officer of the sector. His presence filled the room, a man both feared and respected, his reputation carved from decades of operations. When he saw Sarah, he motioned her forward. "Lieutenant Hayes, you've caused quite a stir." Sarah saluted sharply. "Sir." Rourke's eyes bore into hers, assessing, weighing. 2 enemy generals dead, an ambush broken, a sector saved, and all because one soldier refused to retreat. He leaned forward, his voice dropping low. "Explain yourself. Why?" Sarah inhaled slowly, her mind flashing back to the valley, the smoke, the gunfire, the glimpse of commanders on the ridge. "Sir, I assessed the situation. Retreat would have allowed them to regroup. I believed eliminating their leadership would break the ambush and prevent greater losses." Rourke's lips curled into something between a smile and a grimace. "Believed?" "Lieutenant, that was more than belief. That was calculated defiance. And it worked." He straightened. "Do you know the scale of what you've done? Those generals weren't just targets of opportunity. Intelligence confirms they were orchestrating a campaign across the region. Thousands of lives saved, millions of dollars in resources protected, and an enemy machine brought to a grinding halt. All because you advanced when others fell back." Sarah shifted uneasily under the weight of his words. "With respect, sir, I was doing my duty." Rourke chuckled, though it held no mockery. "Duty? Most soldiers' duty ends with survival. You went beyond that. History favors those who do." The debrief stretched for hours. Every detail was dissected: her decision to move forward, her targeting of the generals, her communication with the team, her refusal to obey the retreat order. Sarah answered with clarity, never wavering, never embellishing. She told the truth, as it happened, without seeking praise. When the session ended, Rourke dismissed her with a single line: "Expect recognition, Lieutenant, whether you want it or not." Back at the barracks, Sarah found the team gathered, bandaged, and weary, but alive. The atmosphere was different now. Where once there had been skepticism, even resentment, now there was respect. Cole slapped her shoulder as she entered, his grin wider this time. "Hayes," he said, "you didn't just save us. You rewrote the damn mission." Others nodded in agreement. Even Stevens, standing off to the side, finally approached. His voice was low, almost reluctant. "You disobeyed my order, and you were right to." The acknowledgement meant more to her than medals ever could. Over the next days, word spread like wildfire. Stories traveled faster than official reports. Soldiers whispered in the mess hall about the lieutenant who had walked into enemy fire and killed 2 generals. Analysts referred to her decision as the pivot point of the campaign. Even civilians in nearby safe zones began to hear rumors, their gratitude filtering back through letters and intercepted broadcasts. Sarah tried to ignore it, focusing on recovery and preparation for the next mission, but the whispers followed her. Wherever she went, eyes lingered longer than before, filled with curiosity, admiration, sometimes disbelief. She was no longer just a soldier. She was becoming a symbol. One night, as she sat alone cleaning her rifle, Cole joined her. He lowered himself onto the bench, his face unusually serious. "You know this isn't just about us anymore, right?" he said quietly. "What you did, it's going to ripple. Command will use it for morale. Civilians will cling to it as hope. And the enemy? They'll paint you as a demon, the woman who cut off their heads. You're not just Sarah Hayes anymore. You're a story." Sarah paused, her hands stilling. Over the weapon. A story. The thought unsettled her. She hadn't acted for glory. She hadn't thought about consequences beyond the ridge. She had simply done what felt necessary. But Cole was right. The story had already begun, with or without her consent. Later, lying in her bunk, Sarah stared at the ceiling. The base hummed with life outside, but inside, she felt the weight of solitude. Heroes were celebrated, but heroes also carried burdens of expectation, of scrutiny, of decisions that would be questioned forever. She closed her eyes, willing sleep to come. But instead, she saw the ridge again, the smoke, the bodies, the silence that followed. And she wondered, not for the first time, if the cost of becoming a story was worth the lives it had saved. When dawn broke, she rose with the others, donning her uniform, lacing her boots. A soldier, still. A human, still. Yet something had changed irrevocably. She walked out into the light, knowing that her life, and perhaps the war itself, would never be the same. The morning sun shone over the base, crisp and unforgiving, highlighting the orderly rows of flags and the polished sheen of vehicles. Sarah Hayes stood at attention, her uniform pressed, medals polished, boots gleaming. Around her, her team formed a protective arc, each man and woman silent, eyes fixed on the ceremony ahead. Today wasn't just another day. Today, the military and the nation would acknowledge what she had done, the act of defiance that had saved countless lives, and changed the course of an entire operation. The stage was simply a raised platform, a lectern, and a microphone. Behind it, senior officers gathered, faces unreadable but heavy with gravity. General Rourke, who had overseen the aftermath of her mission, stepped forward. His presence commanded attention, and for a moment, the weight of history pressed against Sarah's chest as heavily as any battlefield grenade. "Today," Rourke began, his voice carrying across the assembled troops, "we honor courage. We honor decision. We honor one soldier who faced impossible odds and chose to stand against them, not back from them." His gaze swept the crowd, then locked on Sarah. "Lieutenant Sarah Hayes, your actions in the valley were nothing short of extraordinary. You faced an ambush head-on, eliminated 2 enemy generals, and turned a tactical retreat into a decisive victory." The assembled crowd broke into applause, sharp and reverent. Sarah's chest rose and fell as the sound washed over her, but she remained still, expression neutral. She had trained for this training, to endure chaos, but recognition was unfamiliar terrain. Stephen stepped forward, his usually stoic face softened. "I gave an order to fall back," he said quietly, audible to the officers beside him. "Lieutenant." Hayes chose otherwise. She put herself at risk, yes, but in doing so, she saved lives, including every one of mine. That is the kind of courage we teach, but rarely see enacted in its purest form. Sarah's eyes flicked to her team. Cole nodded at her from the side, a small, proud smile on his face. Others stood silently, their respect unspoken but deeply understood. General Rourke continued, producing a medal from a leather case. Its golden sheen caught the sunlight, reflecting across the tarmac. "Lieutenant Hayes, for your extraordinary bravery and decisive action, I award you the Silver Star. Let it serve as a reminder not only of your courage, but of the impact one person can have when they follow their instinct to do what is right." Sarah stepped forward, hands at her sides, heart hammering. She accepted the medal, the cool weight of it unfamiliar against her palm. She saluted sharply, a gesture she had performed countless times in combat, but today it felt heavier, with meaning. The ceremony concluded with formalities, speeches, and the quiet murmur of troops filing away. Sarah returned to her team, placing the medal carefully in the breast pocket of her uniform. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt responsible. Every life saved, every decision made, carried a shadow. War was not a storybook with neat endings. There were consequences, always. Later, in the mess hall, her team gathered around. Laughter punctuated the room, the first time in days that normalcy felt real. Cole clinked his canteen against hers. "To the legend," he said with a smirk. Sarah shook her head, smiling faintly. "Don't call me that. I'm just a soldier doing my job." But deep down, she knew they were right. In the eyes of those who had witnessed her defiance, she had become something more than a soldier. She had become proof that courage wasn't measured by obedience, by medals, or by ranks. It was measured by the choices one made when the world screamed to retreat. Hours later, alone in her quarters, Sarah examined the medal. The medal felt cold, but it burned with memory. The ridge, the smoke, the bullets whistling past. She traced the engraved letters with her fingers, each word a reminder of responsibility and consequence. Her mind replayed the mission one last time. She saw the two generals, the scattered enemy, the team moving under her shield of fire. She saw herself crawling through dirt, every breath a battle. And she saw the moment she made the choice, the moment she refused to turn back. The weight of it pressed on her, heavier than the medal itself. Heroism, she realized, wasn't the applause or the recognition. It was the silent conviction to act, to take a stand, even when the world demanded compliance. Her thoughts drifted to the soldiers who had not survived, to the civilians whose lives she had protected, to the team members who trusted her despite orders. For them, she carried the memory of the night, etched deep into her bones. The phone on her bedside table rang. A familiar voice command, wanting a full debrief, wanting an account to distribute up the chain of command. Sarah answered calmly, detailing every tactical choice, every calculation, every decision. She spoke honestly, without embellishment, knowing the truth was more powerful than legend. When she hung up, she sat back, looking out the window at the setting sun. The valley was far away now, invisible, yet alive in her memory. She thought of the fear, the clarity, the moments that had defined her. And she understood something profound. Courage wasn't about glory. It was about presence, clarity, and the willingness to bear the weight of consequence. In that quiet moment, Sarah Hayes allowed herself a small smile. She had done what she believed was right. She had faced the impossible, stepped into fire, and emerged still standing, not unscathed, not invincible, but alive with purpose. The world would call her a hero. History would record her deeds. Others would tell the story, embellish the moments, transform it into legend. But for Sarah, the mission would always be what mattered, the choice to act, the responsibility she bore, and the lives changed because she refused to step back. The sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the base in soft orange light. Sarah stood, straightening her uniform, the metal gleaming against her chest. Outside, her team laughed and joked, a reminder that life went on. She inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the day, the weight of history, and the weight of courage settle firmly on her shoulders. And for the first time, she let herself feel something close to peace, because she had done what few could. She had chosen to move forward when everyone else stepped back, and in that choice, she had defined herself not by orders, not by ranks, but by the measure of her courage.